The midsummer edition of Democratic Visions features a post-pandemic welcome back hug to Edina for its Independence Day weekend parade.
And they can be streaming on this big conveyor belt.
Eden Prairie's John Pratten employs infrared technology to reduce energy waste. He's a thermographer.
I was on the copy desk, a job for which I was ill-suited.
And Mike Gefand shares his thoughts about the late, great Jim Klobuchar. Here's producer Jeff Strait.
Longtime Star Tribune columnist Jim Klobuchar passed away on May 12th. He was among America's top scribes in the newspaper world, up there with Jimmy Breslin, Mike Royko, and Molly Ivins. Jim was also an adventurer, traveler, and author. As we know, one of Jim Klobuchar's two daughters became a U.S. Senator. Jim campaigned for Amy while covering the Vikings for MinnPost. His stuff was as good as Brett Favre's arm. Before turns at KQRS Radio and the Stretch and Z Show, Mike Gefand worked at the Portland Avenue newspapers.
The point being, I once had a stake in this place.
A few weeks back, we talked about Klobuchar. Mike Gefand, a longtime pal of mine, used to work sports at the Tribune, I think, right?
That's correct.
And has a few stories about Jim. And after we have that short discussion, we're going to look at an interview I did with Jim in 2012. That's when Obama was running for his second term. So, what are your memories of Jim?
Jim and these other guys you talk about, like Breslin and Royko, they were all a little bigger than life. They tended to be. And another guy I'd throw in there was Larry Batson, a terrific writer who wrote a column for the Minneapolis Tribune for quite a while. And these guys all seem to have, coming from the range, it's not surprising either. These guys, but as Klobuchar did, but all these columnists, they were fiery, passionate, indignant, angry guys. They were as good as they were because they wanted to speak out for people who have no voice. The little guy, and I'm a little guy, so I can kind of see where the interest is. And they all tended to be alcoholics too, by the way. I don't know why. I'm not saying they were all alcoholics, but the vast majority of them were alcoholics. Jim was, of course, an alcoholic for many years, but I think about the last 20 years or so, he was sober. The thing about Jim was he was a great writer, and he had a magic about him. One of the magical things about him was that when people talked to him, or at least as the quotes were presented, these people spoke in the most flowery prose imaginable, but they never really did that in real life. But everybody knew it was Jim,
You were talking about maybe Twins players and Viking players and things like this?
Pretty much anybody.
Yeah.
They had a voice that was more articulate when Jim quoted them.
Okay.
But everybody knew it, It wasn't like it was a secret. That was just one of the things Jim did. When other people did it, we might call it cooking quotes. That was a phrase. But we didn't call it what Jim did cooking quotes. We just called it being Jim.
Okay, cooking quotes.
The cooker is, not someone who's typically respected, but Jim was widely respected. And we all just kind of laughed about it. But as I say, they were typically angry guys. Jim was a guy. He was known to get into a bar fight or two. He was an angry drunk. In the last 20 years of his life, for example, I'll just tell you, when I would see Jim in the hallway or out on a story or something occasionally, Jim would sort of grunt at me and nod his some kind of assent, But the last 20 years after he got sober, Jim would always want to talk to me. He'd want to discuss things. How's your dad doing? How are you doing? And he really his personality changed, but he was able to change his personality, I think, without changing his writing. I was on the copy desk, a job for which I was ill-suited, but I had been hired right out of college to work, and they just threw me on the copy desk. They said, I'll give you a reporting job, sooner or later. I managed to be there for 3 weeks before I put in my notice, but one day I thought it was an honor when the slot guy, he was the guy in charge of the copy desk, and he would dish out the stories like a dealer at a casino. He would dish out the stories. Well, he gave me Jim Klobuchar's column, and I thought, well, they really hold me in high esteem here. So I started to look it over, and I started to move my pencil toward his copy. Obviously, this was before computers. That's how long ago it was. But my pencil never hit the actual page, because the slot guy looked at me and said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I didn't even get to finish my sentence." He said, "Nobody touches Jim Klobuchar." And I said, "Well, I understand that. I mean, sure." And I said, "But I don't understand why you gave me this to edit if we can't edit it." He said, "It's protocol, son. It's protocol." So I learned a lot in those 3 weeks on the copy desk. I learned that Jim Klobuchar, who I'd always, of course, held in awe anyway, but I understood then that if you touched his copy, you were a heretic, doomed to journalism hell.
Well, let's see that clip of Jim Klobuchar. Back in 2012, that's when Obama was running for his second term. Jim was at Edenville, that's a camp in Eden Prairie, meeting with local Democrats, Senate District 48, I believe it's called. It was 95 degrees outside, the humidity was about the same. I had set up outside a soapbox where people could answer questions to our camera, and we put it on Southwest TV. Well, Jim walks out the door, and of course I want him on our show back then. And he said, "Yeah, no problem. What do we do?" I said, "Jim, I ask the questions, you give the answers." Here's that tape.
So, what's it like being back in Eden Prairie?
Oh, I love it. I've got a lot of friends here, whatever the political alignments are. But no, it's a great place. I do a lot of shopping in Eden Prairie.
Now, of course, all the Democrats at Eden Prairie and Minnetonka are part of that 1%, right? That's going to get all those breaks, from the Republicans?
Yeah, that's it, right, yeah.
Now, what about Amy's opponent?
Well, I really don't know the gentleman. I know what his party has done in the legislature in the last couple of years. I'm not especially proud of all of that. And the turmoil it's in today, I think, is a result partly of the misguided work they have been doing and strategies. I'm not, I'm a Democrat. My daughter is a United States Senator. I try not to be wildly partisan about that. I know a lot of people, Republicans, I call them ardent Republicans, are good folks, and the people I find very trustworthy in their politics is something probably closer to ours.
Now, give me some practical advice. We have to win the independent voters in Minnesota for not only the U.S. Senate race, but also our local races.
Yeah.
Give us some advice. How am I going to talk to the independent voter about who to vote for?
I think they have to take a look at the trajectory this country is in now, and what we have done by allowing unchallenged amount of money to come into political campaigns now, and what it might be doing to the political process, and the Supreme Court decision empowering all of this massive spending, I think done a great disservice to America and to the fairness of it. And we will see the results of all of that in a couple of months when the advertisements, yes, the Democrats have some. The Democrats aren't saints most of the time. They're good people, probably qualify for something close to that. But no, it's lopsided right now. And I think to the extent that the Supreme Court decision empowering corporations, and it's not only corporations, unlimited money coming into this country with no indication of where it's coming from, who's sponsoring all of this. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce is acting, of course, as a middle person and all of that. And it's in some ways sickening, but this is the hand we have been dealt with. And we can't cringe from that. So we fight the battle we have to fight. And Democrats have to make sure that those who voted for this party into power 4 years ago are back there voting now, because the stakes are even higher. I think if the Republicans win with all this money behind them, and now are in position to determine the course of the Supreme Court for the next 10 or 15 years, I think we've had an example of where they may be going. And I think you have now almost an absolute power, control of money. And what's at stake here? I think the Republicans now have a chance not only to defeat the Democrats, but to destroy them as a political force, and with an enormous outpouring of money.
Guys.
So I think that's what the stake is, and I think Democrats have to know that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You know, that was the late stages of Jim. When he was sort of thoughtful, contemplative, and you could tell that there was an air of serenity about him. Jim went through some obvious metamorphoses throughout his career. But the one thing, even though he was subdued and contemplative at the end, which he wasn't before, subduing him would have been impossible. Only Jim could subdue Jim. But he always had that passion about him, which is what makes all great columnists. It's that passion. It's the fact that you are speaking for people who have no voice. And that's why Jim, frankly, was a Democrat. You know, that's very well suited to a Democrat, is that, you know, you think that there's something good that can be done for people. On the other side, people have to do everything for themselves, damn it.
Recurring drought, record high temperatures, and wildfires out west. Hurricanes, heavy rains, and flooding back east and in the south. The way we live is changing.
The thermographer then is interpreting actually what's going on.
Thermographer John Pratten is an educator and consultant on infrared technology. Infrared readings are used to track glacier and permafrost melts, ocean and farmland temperatures. John focuses on buildings and structures large and small. John Pratten, welcome to Democratic Visions.
Thanks, Jeff. Yep.
Climate change, climate controls are on everybody's mind.
Yeah.
You deal with infrared imaging to figure out what's right or what's wrong with offices, with buildings and equipment. Explain a little bit about what's going on with you.
Well, just stepping back, infrared is just part of the electromagnetic spectrum. And it includes things from gamma rays all the way up to radio waves. And infrared is just part of that distribution of energy. Very similar to visible light. It's just above visible light, so it is actually the red portion of that visible. And the warmer things are, the closer they actually get to visible light. The infrared band is broken down into three basic categories: near infrared, short wave, and long wave.
Okay.
The cameras that I've got today, and most of my discussion is regarding the long wave technology.
Sure.
And the things that we can do with that is looking at air infiltration through buildings, the lack of insulation, moisture in the subfloor, moisture in the roof membrane on the building. On the electrical side, we're looking at the equipment that manufactures things, everything from an automobile to a stuffed bear with electronics in it. And
A stuffed bear.
well, yeah, you know, the talking bears. You know,
the talking bears.
Yeah, the talking
I haven't met many recently, but
Anyway, so infrared
Yeah.
allows you to look at the equipment that's actually manufacturing it. Some companies use infrared to help make their products better, as an example. Looking for components that may be running too warm where they should be at a more regular ambient type temperature.
again, what is the difference between infrared rays and visual rays, the light that we can see?
Sure. Well, the sun is actually emitting both. The interesting thing is that on the visible, you will have things like a light bulb, as an example, that emit at a peak radiation that works for our eyes, so we can see it.
Sure.
Now, infrared and visible generally have the same characteristics, but there's a few exceptions. Infrared does not go through glass. It doesn't go through any solid surface at all. What it does go through is the air. It goes through very thin plastics. So it just gives you an opportunity to put my camera inside of a plastic bag if it's raining outside.
Okay.
And I can still see through the plastic bag,
Yeah.
as an example.
But what about a black plastic bag?
Well, as an example, if
Would you know?
we can demonstrate.
Good.
but
Ready to go. Listen.
I could put my hand inside the bag, and visually you cannot see it.
Yeah.
But thermally, we'd be able to see my hand.
Okay, fine.
Okay.
Because heat's generated, and the
Correct.
infrared imaging is going to pick it up.
Yep. And it's
Okay.
similar to a piece of plexiglass or glass.
What happens then?
Well, infrared won't go through the plexiglass.
Okay.
So if I held it up partway across my face, you would see the thermal part of my face on this side, but this would be blocked. Where visually, you can see both sides.
When businesses or homeowners want to see if they're leaking heat, you got to do a lot of photography.
You don't necessarily need to take still images until you're ready to actually capture an image, but we
Okay.
would just have the camera on in a live mode,
Okay.
and we would walk around, and you're looking at the areas between walls and the ceiling and the corners and around windows and doors, all the obvious places, around outlets as an example, on an outside wall. And we're looking for air infiltration. Now, one thing that we need to do with infrared is we have to have a temperature difference between outdoors and indoors. And typically with a camera, a good camera, you're looking at 3 or 4 degrees. When you're looking at air infiltration, if we're looking for insulation problems, you need a little bit more temperature difference than that. So we're just looking for anomalies. So if it's an insulation problem, we'll see where the insulation has settled, as an example, in a wall. And determine whether, okay, we need to put insulation in there to fix it, or it's costing us money because it's leaking the heat energy in the house, or allowing heat outside to come in when we're trying to cool the house.
What about industrial equipment, machinery, electrical circuit boards? Is infrared going to be helpful?
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you give me an example of that?
Well, yeah, we're looking at a control box or a distribution panel as an example, or a disconnect on a big major machine. We're going to go in and open it up, and we're going to investigate the connection points, the cables, power coming in, going through the breakers as an example, and then the power going out to the machine. And we're looking at all those connection points. If there's a loose connection, as an example, that flow of electrons is interfered with. It slows them down. So the electrons sort of bump into each other. The more loose the connection is, the more collision there is, and the more heat is generated. So you can have some significant temperature differences if you've got a pretty loose connection. Or the component, the fuse itself, could be failing because of a manufacturer defect or just age. And so we would note that, take an image of it. We'd capture both the thermal and a visual image with the cameras, and then report that to the client so that they can do the repair that's appropriate. Tighten the lug, change the fuse, or that type of thing.
Something that simple, too.
It's actually very simple. We call the thing basically thermography.
Okay.
And it's the capturing of infrared radiation into the camera, and it creates a thermograph, very similar to a visual image, but it's a description of that infrared pattern that the camera is capturing from the target.
What's going on inside the camera?
Well, the detector itself...
It's called a detector,
The
okay.
detector itself
Yeah.
is actually unique. It's one of the most expensive components in the camera. It captures infrared radiation. The computer inside the camera applies a voltage to the different cells based on the amount of radiation that's striking the cell. And that Then they turn that into really an image, which is nothing more than like an Excel spreadsheet with rows and columns. And every pixel has a unique temperature, and the computer applies a color palette to it so that you have a nice thermal pattern that represents the target that you're trying to capture.
You're using drone cameras from time to time. Is this true?
That's very true.
Okay.
And the technology has allowed us to have an infrared camera that's very small in light, very good resolution, and we can put it on a drone along with a visual camera, and you can fly around buildings, inspect roofs without actually climbing up on the roof. It's just a fast and more inexpensive way, because a lot of roof inspections, even today, but historically, have been fixed-wing aircraft or helicopters. So the cost to take and capture images of a roof were a lot more expensive.
During the pandemic, the COVID-19 protocols, people needed to have their temperatures taken before they were admitted into a hospital or some other institution. Does infrared come into play? Can that be of help?
Yeah, absolutely. And you probably walked into a number of buildings, a hospital or certain businesses, where they would take your temperature with a point radiometer, what they call them, just a little point and shoot. Yeah. And they're just measuring generally an area on your forehead. And it's coming up with a temperature of 94.5 or 97, something like that, and it's generally a pass.
But what happens in the wintertime? You say you walk 3 blocks from your car into a hospital, and all of a sudden it's 72 degrees. Is that...
Well, it's a problem. The cameras that are being used for the most part aren't really that accurate. It's really giving people a comfort zone. It's acceptable, not necessarily as accurate as people think it is.
But if it's off, they might bring out the old mercury thermometer or something like that.
They might, yes.
They might, okay. Again, I'm way behind the times, and thank you for helping me catch up.
Yeah, well, you're welcome. Yeah. Thank you.
Edina's 4th of July parade returned after a year's absence. We know why. Well, I took my camera there. Get ready to smile.
We're the Anti-Racism Collective, a grassroots movement here in Edina, working to end the dehumanization of people based on the random characteristics of their skin and the pathologizing of community. And we're really doing that through conversation, neighbor to neighbor. How can we do better? How can we unlearn those things that rain down on us as children and generationally? And how can we learn to speak out and take action?
Are you on Facebook?
We are on Facebook, the Anti-Racism Collective, and you can check us out at our website, ar-collective.org.
And can I get your name, please?
My name's Terry Rhodes.
Glad to be back with the 4th.
Yeah, it's terrific. Yeah, after that year absence, you can see all of the pent-up excitement here for the people for the 4th. For the, for celebrating the nation's birthday here today, and then for the rest of the summer, I think it's just going to be get to be more and more as it used to be, with people interacting with each other and really enjoying each other's company.
I'm good, always been evading, just Tokyo home.
Hey, happy 4th of July.
Hey, happy 4th!
Yes! Hello! Hey, Spencer, to the left. To the left. Dave, are you going to shout out the hug? Are you going to tell them to hug?
Celebrate your freedom!
Happy Independence Day, everybody!
Happy Independence Day, Jeffrey!
That last band march was Edina High School's fight song, I've Been a Hornet Since 1959. Say, thanks for staying with us. We'll see you next time.
Democratic Visions is handcrafted by volunteers from Eden Prairie, Hopkins, Minnetonka, Edina, and Bloomington. Watch us on select cable systems and on our YouTube channel. This is Carol Sundstrom.